So as Lama Zopa says in his book, if during this life, if you want to help somebody, the time they need you most of the entire life is at the time of death. So that's kind of peculiar for us, isn't it? I mean, we've got amazing hospitals and nurses and hospice people and kind people who take care of dying people, but it's clear that having the philosophical materialist view of life, which means when you die, that's the end, it's really clear in both the good and the bad ways that why would you help a person at the time of death, It seems rather odd. But for the Buddhist view, this is a crucial point to really understand from the big picture point of view, if we're looking at the entire view of the Buddhist, the entire picture of the Buddhist view of reality, this utterly makes sense. So it's often strange for us, but let's look at it. So first of all, even from the materialist point of view, it's become so much more a part of life now. It's marvelous that people are looking at death, isn't it? Not living in denial of it. I remember some very moving conferences I've been to. I remember one in Australia, in a small country town. There was a conference about death and dying, and there were many nurses and doctors who were happily choosing this part of this job to help people at the time of death. And so it's very marvelous. I went to one conference in Sydney at a children's hospital where the doctor there, his department was dealing with the death of children, sickness and death of babies and children. And of course, in our culture, that's the thing we just cannot bear to confront. So really, it was this very special conference, the way he had all the speakers and opening it up and making people less fearful and getting people to talk about it, breaking down all the fear and the trauma about it and the guilt often about children and babies dying. And I remember the morgue in the hospital for the children was decorated like a nursery, and he kept it open. And so all the siblings, the little brothers and sisters, would be going in and out, and they'd say, "Come and meet my dead brother," making it much less fearful, which is so marvelous. So of course that's absolutely the point in Buddhism, as you've been learning from Gus with the teachings, and as we know if we studied any Buddhist teachings, one of Buddha's first teachings, his most fundamental one about how reality is that things change. I mean, it seems almost so simple we're embarrassed to hear it. We think, well, of course we know that. But Buddha says, no, we do not know it. The way we experience life, the way we live, the way we talk, it clearly shows. We might know it intellectually, but experientially we live in complete denial of change. And so Buddhism, of course, has this marvelous analysis of why that is. And that's linked very much, of course, because of attachment, So at the time of death, so then why is it important for a Buddhist? Why is at that time when someone needs you most? So clear from the Buddhist perspective. Because our consciousness, which is not physical, came into this life fully programmed with our tendencies and our karmic imprints, which determine the quality of our life and what happens to us. So anyway, at the time of death, all right, yes, so as the Buddha points out to us, in his main teachings about impermanence, which are so down to earth, which are so evident, but it's something we even are surprised about, that we don't, because we desperately don't like change, we live in denial of change. And so of course, Atisha, this marvelous Indian scholar and yogi and saint who came to Tibet in the 11th century or something, 11th century, I suppose, yes. And his little text that he wrote, which is the basis of the Lam Rim literature of Tsongkhapa, the first thing he gets us to talk about, the first thing he gets us to meditate on, is not just Buddha's vast teachings about impermanence in general, which are very fascinating, and even more so, not Buddha's teachings about subtle impermanence, which are really fascinating. He got us to talk about impermanence, but in particular in relation to our own death, because Atisha's agenda is very particular. He wants to give us a wake-up call. He wants us to not waste this precious life. And so when we realize that death is definite, the time of death is uncertain, and at the time of death, given the Buddhist view, and this is the point here, given that our consciousness comes from before and will continue when we die, this is an utter given in all of the vast literature of Buddha's view of reality. Consciousness is not physical. It is not the handiwork of a creator. It is not the handiwork of parents, although they give us a body, no question, but they do not give us our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our karmic tendencies. These are our own. This is a fundamental point in Buddhism. It's the basis of all practice, this recognition, So given all this, Atisha in his text, and then Tsongkhapa in the Lam Rim, one of the first meditations we do, which becomes the basis of living a better life, it gives us a wake-up call. When we begin to realize the certainty of this radical impermanence, meaning that this person that I'm so primordially attached to will not exist. It will die. That's a starting point in Buddhism. But it teaches gender is to give us a wake-up call not to waste this precious life, because then the next step he gets, of course, as we know, the next point he gets us to contemplate after thinking about this radical impermanence is that, given, which we learn about later in the Lama, given that my mind is imbued with countless karmic imprints, we have no certainty that the rebirth we take won't be suffering. So then he gets us to consider this, which increases our wish not to waste this precious life. Then he gets us to think, well, whom can we turn to give us the methods? And then we take refuge. And then the real practice starts, which is the culmination of the first level of practice, the lowest scope of teachings. I like to call it junior school. It culminates in then starting to actually practice. And when we start to actually practice, that's abiding by the laws of karma, which is Buddha's entire view of the universe, of what a person is and what happiness is and what suffering is and what are the causes and exactly what we can do about it. That's when we really become a proactive Buddhist, abide by the laws of karma. So all of this, of course, is a huge preparation for the time of death when it comes, because logically, if you live your life in denial of the fact that you're going to die, and given that we're driven by lots of delusions, especially attachment, that's why we live in denial of impermanence, because we're so attached to this me, this package. Then we get completely caught up in attachment to me, and then our body and speech, which are the servants of our attachment, just follow the cravings of attachment. And then when attachment doesn't get what it wants, the body and speech follow the anger and harm sentient beings. Then we make a complete mess of our lives. When we do die, then it's a horrifying experience, because we can't stand the thought of it, and we're resisting it mightily, and then we have an awful rebirth because we've not created the programmed our mind with decent karmic seeds. Because the essence of the point in Buddhism, as opposed to the Christian teachings and the Muslim teachings, the creator religions, Buddha absolutely is not a creator, and he doesn't assert a creator. Therefore, what takes us time to really get in touch with, which energizes us to live a good life, is not because we don't want to be punished, because there's no such thing as a punisher in Buddhism. There's no such thing as a creator. So there's no creator, there's no punishment, there's no reward, because there's no punisher, there's no rewarder. So this is the approach to karma. So when we really live our lives with this sense of urgency not to waste this precious life, because everything we think and do and say programs us, puts seeds in our mind, and given that we're going to die and we don't know when we're going to die, then just by thinking about this impermanence at this level, that time of death is, the death is definite, but the time of death is not definite, and then we start to abide by the laws of karma, then we live a marvelous life. Our life is transformed. I mean, all the Lamas say, even if we just have some semblance of realization, of genuine and sincere recognition of the reality of the changingness of myself every second and the eventual death of this person, this actually transforms our lives. We become more steady, less attached, less angry, less neurotic, more accountable, more fulfilled, and more content. And surely that's what we want. So then when death does come, it will be a relaxing event. And this is really true. For me, we know this somehow. We know if you've got some event in the future, like your driving test, you know perfectly well the extent to which you've driven throughout the time before the driving test, the extent to which you've thought about it every day and driven your car and prepared for your driving test, then that's the degree to which it will be a relaxing event and you will succeed nicely. But if you live in denial of your driving and think, oh, well, I'll be okay on the day, which is what we think about death, your driving test will be a shock and awful and a disaster. Well, it's the same here, So, of course, this kind of talk sounds very threatening, doesn't it? I mean, we're so used to hearing this kind of talk in religion, and because we're used to thinking there's a creator, and the creator's job is to punish and reward, it just kind of makes us very neurotic, It can be very shocking hearing about this idea of karma. But the thing is, the more we think about it properly, what it brings actually is a really healthy sense of responsibility. We get this incredible feeling, which is the Buddha's point, and it takes time, really, that we are actually the creator of ourselves. His Holiness Dalai Lama calls karma self-creation. I mean, it's pretty intense. So becoming familiar with this idea that I create myself moment by moment, rather than the victim view that everyone else does it to me and I didn't ask to get born and I don't play any role in my life at all and life is just good luck and bad luck and you cross your fingers. That's an appalling way to live our lives. And actually that's how we live our lives normally. So the view of impermanence energizes us because that death is definite, the time is not definite. And then when we start to think about karma, we realize that at the time of death, given that everything I think and do and say sows seeds in my mind, and then those that will be triggered at the time of death, and this is a very precise technical point, which we're now going to go into, as you've heard already from Gus, that, that every millisecond what we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind. And at the time of death, once the death process starts, and that's from the Vajrayana, and I'm sure you've been through that, haven't you, Gus? The death process, yeah. Then once that starts to kick in, usually a couple of hours before you stop breathing, but obviously it can be different from that. It can be immediate or it can take longer. So then once that process kicks in, another way of interpreting what happens at death also kicks in, and that's from the Sutra teachings, and that's something in Lama Zopa's book. There's a chapter there about the role of the 12 links of dependent arising at the time of death. And this is a really important thing to understand, and this is quite technical. So we'll go into all of this. This gives us the nuts and bolts of how to deal with death, how to approach death, not just kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best, So there's logic to it all if we get the big picture in Buddhism. And then but the main one in the beginning is to start to recognize that I will die at some point. The broader teaching there is that things change. And because unless we're clairvoyant, we don't know what change will come. We don't know that the husband won't die on us. We don't know that our babies won't die. We don't know that our money will disappear. Nobody predicted not very soon before the event COVID-19 and the disaster that's happening on the entire planet. We're not clairvoyant, and even if we see certain signs of things, because we're so attached to the present, we don't pay attention. So then we don't learn from our experiences. So there's two ways of getting ready for death, preparing for death. The first is to live your life. And this is kind of the most obvious. To live your life in an appropriate way, which, using Buddhist terminology, means recognizing that death is true and that you will continue in another rebirth. That's the assumption here. That's the hypothesis we're taking as a Buddhist. And that everything you think and do and say programs your mind and will determine the future rebirth. So that's the most powerful point about first recognizing death and impermanence and then thinking about karma, because that's the piece that explains to us what we can do about death. So what we can do about death first is live a life in an appropriate way. If you practice every day, you practice the law, living according to the law of ethics. You don't harm, steal, lie, kill. You work on your mind. You turn yourself into a marvelous person, which means the actions you do with your body, speech, and mind become virtuous. You then become a more content person. You then, when death does come, you're not living in denial of it. And then if you also practiced from the Vajrayana point of view, then you'll have your practices ready and you'll know what to do at the time. Then death will be a very blissful experience. And that really isn't a joke. The Lama Zopa points out, and we're going to go into all these things, Lama Zopa points out, because attachment to me is the main source of the suffering at the time of death, because we can't stand the thought of not being me. So the main reason there's any fear at all at the time of death, Rinpoche says, is because of attachment to this person. And that usually means attachment to this body, because that's what we think of as me, isn't it? The thing we can see and feel. So this is the nightmare of the suffering of most people. I remember one of my friends in California, this is like 30, 40 years ago when she worked in the hospice movement then, she said it was a given among her colleagues that most people did die with fear. But the only ones she observed then who didn't die with fear were those who had some kind of spiritual philosophy. And that's not because they were great practitioners, but this is the real key point that Buddha's making when it comes to karma. We've all got viewpoints in our mind. We just don't think so. So if you're a materialist, you might say, oh, I don't believe in anything. But actually, of course you believe in something. You believe that you'll turn into dust when you die. You believe that you'll fall into a black hole. You believe that your mind is your brain. You believe that someone else made you. Everybody's got beliefs. It's a bit of a surprise to us because we just think religion is belief and everything else is truth. No, on the contrary, Buddha says we all have beliefs. Some of them might be valid and many of them are absolutely not. So, if you live in denial of death because you're so attached to this me, death will be fearful because, and we're going to give the reasons why, technically. But she said the reason, this is what I'm pointing out here, the people who were the spiritual practitioners, whatever the practice they had, it was not because they were great practitioners that they didn't have fear. It was because they had something in their mind about the future. They knew they would die and go to heaven with God. They had this confidence. Just now, I read this several times. I read recently, a well-known person actually. Who was it? Reese Witherspoon. A lovely interview with Reese Witherspoon, that amazing actor. Incredible woman. Amazing, wonderful woman. Makes amazing films. Has a production company, makes her own films, makes films for women. And she's got, I didn't read this before, but I read it yesterday, that she's got complete faith in God. And she said, I know where I'm going. And even interestingly, Lama Zopa, in his book, he quotes a woman he heard on the radio in Australia saying, I know where I'm going. People who have complete faith in God and complete faith in this afterlife, they call it, but it's another rebirth, it's for the Buddha, called heaven. This blissful state where you're oneness with God. So for the Buddha, he has similar ideas. It doesn't call it like that. So this is an interesting point. So then for her, who also happens to have ethics, she seems like a really excellent person, lives a good life, helps others. She said, I'm not worried, she said. I know where I'm going. Well, that's confidence. So then that person will not die with fear because she's preparing for it. That's the point in Buddhism. The difference, of course, Buddhism wouldn't say going to heaven with God. Buddha would say taking another rebirth. So, of course, because we know from the Buddha's teachings there's a whole spectrum of possibilities of rebirth, you start becoming conscious about it and you want a decent rebirth, either another good human rebirth, or, if you've heard about Pure Lands, you want to get born there because you can get enlightened quickly in Pure Lands. And that's another whole discussion. Lama Zopa talks about it quite often in his book. But the bottom line is when we start to realize not even just you have faith in God, but that you have confidence in this process. Clearly that you have confidence in this law of cause and effect, that whatever you think and do and say produces the person you become. And because you know that you want another decent human rebirth after you die, then you simply prepare for it. You don't leave it to someone else. You prepare for it. You're the boss. It's a very powerful approach to live your life. And then, like with the Christian who believes in heaven, like with the Muslim who believes in heaven, you've got something to look forward to. And this is a very fascinating point. Rinpoche says in the Bodhisattva path, there's a way we can utilize attachment. Attachment is the reason we have so much fear at death, because you're clinging desperately to this body. But he says you can use attachment. And so, for example, Reese Witherspoon, looking forward to going to heaven, that's attachment. But it's very skillful. It's skillful means because her mind will be relaxed. She'll live a good life. She'll have a happy death. And when your mind is happy at the time of death, from the Buddhist perspective, that triggers the virtuous karmic seed that will determine your next life. That's the kind of technology we have to learn about in this explanation of the 12 links at the time of death. So we'll discuss this. We'll do this. So it's having confidence. And the word faith, let's look at the word faith. It's with faith. Confidence, confide, with faith, confidence. It's a very necessary quality, And that only comes from our own certainty by reading the teachings, thinking about it, listening to who the Buddha is. And that's up to us whether we have confidence in Buddha's teachings. And that's up to us whether we have confidence in the law of karma. So from the very beginning, it's up to us, to be in charge of the process. This is the key. This is a particular factor in Buddhism that's quite unique to the Buddha. The idea that we create our own reality is definitely a unique view of the Buddhist, because he doesn't propose such a thing as a creator. And I'm not being rude. He says we don't need creating. Our consciousness comes from before and it will continue. We're the one who determines the kind of person we become. And that's a very powerful sense of responsibility to have. That's a very powerful idea philosophically, and if it's true, it's very powerful. And to get that, to have that view, demands that we take responsibility. We know perfectly well it's not just the people who make the crummy food that causes you to get sick. It's you who decide to eat the food. So you're the boss. It's fine to blame Marlboro for getting cancer, and you can even sue them, but that won't help you until you decide stop. You're the boss. You've got to stop smoking cigarettes. You're the one who chose to smoke cigarettes, indeed out of ignorance. So the karmic view brings us to the center of responsibility for our lives. And that's the particular component in the Buddhist approach to life, We are the boss. We are the one who creates our own reality. We are the one who sows the seeds in our mind that will determine our future life. We are the ones who in the past sowed the seeds in our mind that produced our present life. This is quite a powerful concept in Buddhism, and it takes time for us, I think, to really take that on board. Because the ego grasping in us, the delusions in us, cause us to feel somehow that things aren't my fault, that I'm not responsible. Someone else made me. Someone else is the cause of my happiness. Someone else is the cause of my suffering. It's very powerful in us. And we don't need to learn that even as a philosophy because we feel it. But the Buddha would say that's ego grasping's problem. That's the delusion's problem. So living your life within the framework of the reality of death, that death is definite. The time of it is not definite. And then at the time of death, this is like the conclusion of these 3 points. Given that my consciousness is not physical, given it comes from the past, programmed with my karmic tendencies, with the seeds that I've planted in my mind from my past actions. I'm the boss. Given that crucial point, given that my consciousness will continue when I die, and given, of course, that everything I think and do and say, the seeds I've brought with me from the past, plus the seeds I plant now, every millisecond of what I think and do and say will put more seeds into my various bank vaults, and that they will be the ones, some of those will be the ones that will determine my next life. So finally, given that the seeds that we can label negative, which are those that are sown in our mind, dropped into our bank vault, if you like, on the basis of doing actions that harm others and are negative actions, actions motivated by a delusion, they will necessarily ripen as suffering. It's just a natural law for the Buddha. It's not punishment. It's not reward. There is no punisher. There is no rewarder. It is simply his observation that this is just naturally what happens. There's no equivalent really in Buddhism of God's law. We're very used to thinking that way, I think. But then finally, given, we'll go into that perhaps, given that the seeds that I plant in my mind that are called virtuous, or positive, which are those that are sown in my mind on the basis of actions that I've done that are labeled positive, which are actions of my body and speech driven by a virtuous state of mind, that those seeds will ripen as my future happiness. So given all those things, it's a no-brainer, a conclusion. You better start practicing now, baby, Recognizing impermanence, recognizing I'll die at some point, therefore driven by the wish to only sow positive seeds and not sow negative seeds, and indeed to also purify the negative seeds I've already planted. That's the basis of a good life. There's no discussion even of compassion yet. We can all include all that, but this is the fundamental nuts and bolts of Buddha's view of the universe. This is the perfect way to live your life. Then when death does come, it won't be a surprise, and you'll be blissed out because you'll be ready. All the Lamas say that dying, if you've got the view of reincarnation, dying with this terrible regret of a wasted life is one of the most painful ways to die. That you've wasted your opportunities, you've wasted your life. We spend our lives putting things off and not doing the practices we want to do, and not sowing the seeds you want to sow. It's the most painful way to die. So having this sense of responsibility framed in this view of karma, causing us to know that it's up to me to produce the person I want to become. And then knowing that when your mind is virtuous and you've trained and you're disciplined and you live according to the laws of karma, and you know that you're going to die at some point, and you contemplate that reality. So it doesn't become, it's sort of like in our culture, we think that sounds really, that sounds like you're going to be living in fear all the time. No, on the contrary, it just becomes part of who you are. You recognize impermanence. Every time you wake up, you bliss out that you're not dead yet because you realize you could have died, because you're not clairvoyant. You don't know when you will die. You realize you're this moving feast, and you realize you're this person, that you're a work in progress. So you live every life much more consciously, much more joyfully. You deal with the problems in a much more profound way because you know that they're going to change as well. So it's a very profound teaching just to think about impermanence, and then to frame it in terms of death, and then on the basis of that to live a good life with the view of karma. This is the nuts and bolts. And then, of course, you can do more work after that. That's all done in junior school. That's done in the first scope of the Lam Rim. Then you can start to think about your mind and go more deep and get renunciation and understand attachment and the delusions and how they cause you suffering. And then you can go to the compassion wing and start practicing compassion and love and developing bodhicitta. So I mean, there's plenty there to do, you know, plenty there to do. And then when death does come, it won't be a shock for us. This is the part that's most profound, you know. So, okay. Let's look then at these two different teachings that describe events that occur at the same time. One is from the Sutra teachings and one is from the Tantric teachings, from the Vajrayana teachings. So it was very interesting when I was working on this book, editing this book for Rinpoche. It was finished a few years ago, nearly finished. Rinpoche knew, and it also, in fact, this whole book started, I always like to tell this, it's in the preface of the book. This is a teaching Rinpoche gave, I think in 2001, he was giving a teaching, or 3, in France, at his center there. And then one of his old students, who's a friend of mine, she came up to Rinpoche and she said that her old daddy, he was like 90-something, had just died and she didn't know what to do. Now, he knows this student, that she's been devoted for many years and practicing a long time. He was surprised by that. I didn't know what to do. Because if you'd assume if you're a Buddhist 10, 20, 30 years, you know all about death, because, I mean, they talk about it all the time, you know. And if you've practiced the Vajrayana and you have your deity practice, you would certainly know about meditating on the 8 stages. But it's because I think we have such a deep fear of it, a denial of it, and especially if you're attached to your parents, you don't want to think about them dying, so we don't prepare. So that was, then Rinpoche shifted focus in that teaching, and then he started teaching, taking this text, which he quotes in this book quite extensively. He used 2 sources for this teaching, at this teaching in France, about impermanence and death. One of them is a book in Tibetan that there's some man, I can't think of his name, wrote in Dharamsala and published in Tibetan, just to tell all these Tibetans about their own culture, about death, and how to confront it, and how to face it, and how to be ready for it. It was really helpful. So he quoted quite a lot from that book, but he also quoted from the teachings of particularly Chodron Rinpoche, who taught on death in particular at Land of Medicine Buddha in California a couple of years after that, somewhere later. So he used these as his sources, but of course he quoted from his other teachers as well, you know. So then that was the basis of the book, and he asked that be put together in a book, and I put it together eventually. But then I knew it wasn't finished because it was really quite short, you know. So then I had to really think about what was missing. Then I'd read through, and Rinpoche's been teaching for like 50 years, and all these archive of teachings are all there. So there's masses of material. So I just started reading different teachings in the archive, and suddenly came across these words about the role of the 12 links at the time of death. I'd never heard this before. It was very fascinating. I'd never heard it. So, you know, first of all, in general, I hadn't studied the 12 links, so I realized this was a really important missing piece, really crucial. And so let's talk about this. So the 12 links is a teaching in the sutras given by the Buddha, where he describes in great detail these 12 different steps that our mind and our actions naturally take every second of the day. So insofar as we are creating countless cycles of rebirth, countless types of rebirth every second. So the first one is this: ignorance, which gives rise to the next one, which gives rise to that, which gives rise to this, and therefore that, and therefore that, and therefore death, and off you go again. It's just this, and it's very, and I mean, I've not studied it in depth, and I had to read a bit about it so I can understand, but the way Rinpoche talks about it is specific to death, specific to what happens at death. So, okay, where's the book? I didn't get my iPad. Never mind, we'll just discuss it generally. Remember, the book is out by Wisdom. It came out this year, and it's called How to Face Death Without Fear. It was earlier published as sort of a hardback, looking like a bit like a Bible, and it was called How to Enjoy Death. This is the better version, may I suggest. It's structured much better. So, okay, this 12 links is very fascinating. At the time of death, So that's the one thing that goes on technically. And then the other thing that's going on technically is from the Vajrayana teachings, and that's this 8 stages of death, which is something that, as Tibetan Buddhists, we study this a lot. So it's something that we need to become familiar with because it's describing this deconstruction of the person. It's describing the actual technical deconstruction of the components that make up a person. And of course, it's from the Vajrayana point of view. So it's really important to understand this. So let's just describe that. Look at that just briefly. You've studied this with Gus, I realize. But then we'll bring in what happens according to the 12 links because they occur at similar time. They're separate systems, but it's really helpful to understand, extremely helpful to understand. So in order to understand the 8 stages of death, we need to understand, roughly speaking, the Vajrayana presentation of a person or of the physical world, of the world, basically. So according to the Vajrayana model of the universe, the more advanced teachings and philosophy and so, of the Buddha, mainly only really extant among Tibetan Buddhists. All of the teachings of Buddhism come from India, but only some went to different countries. You know, so the Theravadan teachings, the Mahayana Bodhicitta teachings aren't there, and then in Japan that's the Mahayana, and Taiwan, but the tantric teachings aren't there. It's only really in India that these extensive literature of the Vajrayana and all the tantric practices came and are still extant in exile among the great knowledge holders, you know. So according to that model of the universe, there's basically only matter and minds. Minds are not physical. This is fundamental in Buddhism. If Buddha can be proved to be wrong in his observation that your consciousness is not physical, if it can be proved to be wrong, then the whole of the Buddhist worldview would collapse into a heap of utter absurdity. That's a fact. Because everything in Buddhism is based upon this view of consciousness not being physical, being a continuity of mental moments, being beginningless, endless, no creator, the view of karma. All of this are integrated. All of this is integrated into this coherent whole worldview of the Buddhas. So this is our hypothesis here. The consciousness is not physical. So then the matter in the universe, the Buddhist view, and the Vajrayana described specifically, and this used to be the view that I think we had in our Western culture a few centuries ago, and that's certainly the view that's you can see it in the Chinese acupuncture system, in the Indian Ayurvedic system, and certainly in the Tibetan medical system. This is really the view that the physical world is simply made of the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And when you study Buddhism, even in the sutra teachings, you learn this in depth, you know. This is the view that's just described. Well, according to this view, all consciousnesses, all rivers of mental moments, all mind streams, these are the different terms, you know. I mean, river of mental moments is my term, it's not in the texts. All minds, all consciousnesses are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. These are the fundamental building blocks of the entire universe. And when we understand this very simple point, we can begin to understand how karma, how what we do with our mind impacts upon the physical, which in turn impacts upon the type of rebirth we get, which impacts upon whether we're suffering or sick or not or whatever. It all comes down to this fundamental point. But this understanding of these 8 stages of death, it's crucial to understand just this principle, this simple theory here about the physical elements and the mind. So, okay. So death, as I said, is this gradual deconstruction of these various components. So the first way they divide is we've got gross consciousness, and that's inextricably, that's our sensory consciousness mostly, and that's inextricably linked to this gross body. It's clear. You know, your eyeball is physical. For the Buddha, that is not what sees shapes and colors. It's the presence of your consciousness, particularly that part of your consciousness, which is not physical, that is inextricably linked to your eyeball and the nerves, etc., that enables you to have a cognition of color, for example. Ear consciousness, the same. So consciousness is not physical. So we have our sensory consciousnesses, that part of our mind that functions interdependently with the physical piece. So so we've got gross consciousness and we have gross physical body. In our case, this bag of bones, okay? So the first 4 stages of this 8 stages of death are the gradual deconstruction of the 4 senses and the different elements. And we'll go through it. As well as the ceasing of certain kind of mental capacities that we have that cause us to function in daily life, you know. Then by the time you stop breathing, and this is a crucial point here, that's when you're ready for the body bag in the West. That's what's called death. But only your gross consciousness and your gross physicality have ceased. But you're not dead yet, necessarily. You've now got your subtle consciousness. And we don't, of course, posit such a thing in our culture, although, of course, when we understand that what we call the dreaming mind, that's your subtle consciousness. All your thoughts, all your emotions, they're all called subtle consciousness. They're subtler than the gross sensory consciousness. So by the time you stop breathing, it's evident everything seems to have ceased, according to the eye, you know. But you're not dead yet from this perspective. This is particularly the perspective in Tibetan Buddhism, which is Mahayana Buddhism, which is Vajrayana Buddhism, because it studies all these texts, you know. So then you go through this continuing deconstruction process where your subtle consciousness and your subtle physicality cease to function. So the subtle part of us, the subtle physical part of us, is made up of, first of all, 72,000 subtle physical channels. I mean, even though they're physical, you can't see them with your eyes. They're subtle physical, but they're definitely physical insofar as they're not the mind. So there's 72,000 subtle channels covering our entire body. There is one central channel, as they call it, which if your spine went all the way to the top, it would start just in front of the spine. It's towards the back of your head. And that goes all the way down and ends at the penis for the male and the cervix for the female. Then you have these 2 side channels, which would start at the nostrils, that go up, and then they track down along either side of the central channel. They're all kind of messy, these channels. That sounds kind of smooth, but they're not like that. But there are 72,000 altogether. That's the first component of your subtle body, subtle physicality. The second one is the wind energies. This is a fundamental part of Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine. It's based upon this principle of the 4 elements. So the wind is the subtlest of the 4 elements. First, in the death process, and we're going to go through it, the earth ceases, the water, the fire, and then the breathing stops. But now your subtle wind is still there, and this is the point in the Vajrayana. And this helps us understand karma as we we start to study more deeply. The subtle wind energies is prana, and there's many kinds of these, and they study in the Tibetan medical system 12, 14 years or something, all these different wind energies, because these are the actual basis of health. That's that system. Clearly, that is not the system we use in our Ayurvedic medicine now. You know, it's very interesting. So all these wind energies coursing through all of these channels. But the crucial point is this. All of those wind energies are inextricably linked to all your different states of mind. I mean, this is, of course, absurd for us because we think it's the brain. Buddha's not discussing a brain here. That's not his view at all. So all the different, the love and compassion and kindness, all your delusions, all those states of mind, the thousands of states of mind, your virtuous ones, your non-virtuous ones, they're all linked to their own wind energies coursing through these channels. So then gradually the 5th stage of death, certain levels of these physical energies cease, and then each stage. And the third component of this physical body, the subtle physical energies that make up a person, are these subtle red and white, in Sanskrit they're called kundalini, these subtle red and white drops that actually are sourced back to your parents. When you are conceived in your parents' womb, and we'll describe this in the death process, when you're conceived in your mother's fallopian tube, it seems to be, I think the system here talks about something different, but what I've heard is the egg and sperm come together in the fallopian tube. So that egg and sperm are at the gross level, but there's a subtler level of a red and a white, what they call drop, in tigle in Tibetan, the one coming from the mother and the other coming from the father, and they join, and your consciousness joins that subtle red and white drop. And that's the first second of you beginning. And your body begins, you, the person called you, begins when that egg and sperm, that subtle red and white drop come together, and your consciousness joins that. And you start here at the heart chakra. So then as you develop in the fetus, all the bits and pieces start to grow down and up, So the death process is the gradual deconstruction from here and from the feet up, all the way finally till the 8th stage, this 5th and 6th and 7th, getting more subtle, more subtle, more subtle. And finally the 8th stage, which is the subtlest level of this life, the subtlest level of your consciousness and the subtlest level of your physical energy, is this your own consciousness is joined at the heart chakra with what they call this indestructible drop. Everything is deconstructed, all the gross level, the subtle, all the way to the very subtle. And they sometimes call this the clear light mind. It's the subtlest level of your consciousness. And as long as it's there, conjoined with that red and white drop at the heart chakra, you are still alive. And all the Buddhist teachings in this tradition would say that it's up to 3 days from the time you stop breathing that mind can still be in the body. And in fact, there's a way of checking. You can put your hand just above that spot on the dog as well. And if it's warm, if the mind is still there, this is called very subtle mind. We've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, very subtle consciousness. Gross body, very subtle body. So if your very subtle consciousness is still there, it will be distinctly warm when you put your hand above the heart chakra. And when it's gone, when it's cold, that's a sign the mind has left the body. So this plays a major role, and in Lama's book we discuss this. This plays a really important role in understanding exactly when death occurs, and therefore it especially plays a big role in the way you help the person who is dying and who has finally stopped breathing. Because if in the materialist view you consider they're now dead from the time they've stopped breathing, then we grab the body and we chuck it in here and we clean it and we cut it up or we put new organs into it, whereas it can take up to 3 days for the mind to leave. That's why it's fundamentally important. In the section on what to do once your loved one has died, there's a whole series of chapters. What to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do if your loved one dies in a hospital or something, what to do if your loved one dies suddenly, what to do if your loved one dies and they're giving their organs, what to do if your loved one is a meditator, these different scenarios. So when we know what's going on, as Lama Zopa says, this is education we all need, because we need to make firm decisions about what to do. So often what happens, we freak out when our beloved mummy dies or somebody dies, and we hand over our power to the doctors and the nurses, if it's hospital that we're dying in. And of course, they're very kind people, but they're not concerned about the consciousness, they're concerned about the body. So when we know what we're doing and we've got our wits about us, one of the crucial things is to be really conscious of what you want to happen. And then the hospitals are very kind people. You negotiate with them in advance, for example, that if your mummy dies in the hospital bed, you've already negotiated in advance, hopefully, that they'll let you have as long as you can. I've seen this in many cases of Buddhists dying in hospitals. If you tell the people, if they've got space, can we leave mummy there as long as we can? Of course, maybe you can't have 3 days. I mean, they're usually desperate for beds, But as if you've got the luxury to have a private hospital, you got your own private room. I mean, a friend of mine in Australia was with her dying husband for days, living in the same room in a private nursing home. And when he died, she shooed them all out, locked the door, and stayed there for 3 days and helped him go through the whole process. That's the ideal. And that's probably why, incidentally, the ideal scenario in which to die is at home, where you have control, or where you're rich enough to have your own room. That's the best, for lots of reasons, for lots of reasons. One of them is this, that you can control the number of days you keep. And that used to be the way it was. I mean, I remember when my own grandmother died. We were Catholics. All the nuns came. They kept the body for days. They all sat around, did prayers. It's very similar in the Buddhist one. And many people do still adhere to that. If some people are a bit afraid, but if you are a Tibetan Buddhist, that is what you do. You'd leave your mummy there, and you'd have it like continuous prayers and practices throughout those 3 days. That's the ideal scenario. In all the monasteries, they do that. When the monk dies or the nun dies, they had Lama Lundup, when he died at Kopan, when Geshe Lama Konchog died at Kopan, that's exactly what they did. Throughout 24 hours a day, for those 3 days. And then once they do the cremation, you do more prayers and things for the next 49 days, because that's how long traditionally it is said that it can take for that consciousness to take a rebirth, So, but the crucial thing is to know what goes on at the time of death, which then determines the way you behave. It determines what you do. It determines your choices. And as Lama Zopa says, this is education we all need, you know. Because again, the whole point, remember, the entire point behind all the advice in this book, the one simple point is to help your loved one die peacefully and therefore virtuously, which enables a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, which will determine they get another decent human rebirth. Very minimum. That's the bottom line. That's the whole purpose of why death is important in Buddhism, because the way you die determines the karmic seeds that will be triggered, which in turn determine the type of rebirth you get. This is the point, and this is unique to the Buddhist approach, obviously, you know, is unique. So it's very powerful. So we'll see if there's any quick questions, but we're going to now go into these, both the 12 links and the 8 stages. We'll go into that. But any questions, so I can hear if you would like to know other things. And I'll try and do it quickly, then we'll have more questions because, you know, so ask me questions now, if there are any. If not, I'll carry on.
I have a quick question, maybe, Venerable Robina.
Who is it?
It's Rebecca.
Rebecca, good. And then Gus had a question too. Okay, good.
Oh, sorry, Gus. In the I know you're going to do the 12 links now, but what you were just talking about, the becoming, it says the 2 karmas.
We'll go into that. I'll discuss it.
Okay.
I'll have to discuss the whole thing before I discuss that. I'll tell you.
Okay,
we can do it then, darling. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What, Gus?
Venerable, you were speaking about Reese Witherspoon saying, "I know where I'm going,"
yes.
and how she has confidence in that. And
yes.
that was very powerful. I never thought of it that way before.
Yes.
But I'm thinking how in the Lamrim we often think about, with all the negativities that I create, it's almost certain that I'll go into the lower realms.
I know.
So I wonder, like, is it helpful to think that with confidence?
No, so I find this so fascinating. All I can do is give my own commentary on Tibetan culture and how they talk. The thing that really, I mean, I'm not, it's true what they say, but for our minds, this is so shocking to hear. Culturally, this just completely freaks us out. And we are so riddled with guilt and shame. We're all bad already. And it doesn't actually have the effect that it seems to have on the Tibetans to cause them to want to practice. It just makes us feel more neurotic and makes it, because we're so used to feeling that we're being punished by somebody. Whereas in Buddhism, there's no view of a punisher. They know that's their responsibility. But somehow I find that Tibetans, I mean, not being rude, I mean, they're my teachers, you know, I'm a Tibetan Buddhist for God's sake, but they're just very fundamentalist how they talk, the way they describe things. That's why Lama Yeshe was so incredible when he first met Westerners at the same time as Lama Zopa. He just somehow could intuit this hippie kind of mind that we have, and our neuroses and our ego grasping and our guilt. So the way he chose to speak, I'm astonished when I edit his books. It's like he was born a hippie. He just knew how we think. He never talked like that because he could see there was no benefit. But I mean, it's in the teachings, and if we're grown up about it, we can see that it's true. Just mathematically it's true. But if it doesn't help, don't say it. If it doesn't help, we've got to find a way that it energizes. So to say, and this is also the other interesting point, at the same time, Lama Zopa, when he talks about, for example, there's a chapter, because even after that 12 links chapter, I still knew the book wasn't finished. And then I realized it was about the Pure Land. So there's this lovely chapter on Amitabha's Pure Land. And if we have time, I'll try and describe that, because that's an alternative rebirth that's available to anybody, a regular person. Anyway, we'll go into that. But I remember he says in that, the main cause of being born in Amitabha's Pure Land is wanting to go there. He talks about, even when we purify karma, the main cause of purifying karma is the confidence, the complete faith that you have purified. So it's also, all of that is there, but we just sometimes can't hear it, because this is the point about the mind. As Lama Zopa says, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought, intention. That's the first moment in the creating of karma, and that's mental action. So, you know, that one of the lower realms, and, you know, this rebirth is the only one, and we're going to go to the lower realms for eons and all the negative karma. It's probably technically true, but if it doesn't work for your mind, then don't be more optimistic. Think of the future rebirth. Think of going to Amitabha's Pure Land. Have complete confidence. Live a life of virtue, and your mind will be blissfully happy, and your death will be blissfully happy. So there's another way of presenting it, but the point is a really good point.
That was incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Good. I'm so glad. Otherwise, we just get so beaten and tortured and struggle mightily, you know, and it's just not helpful. If it's not helpful to our mind, what's the point? You understand?
Yes.
It's so
Thank you
important,
so
so
much.
important. And that's what really dawned on me when I edited this book. I mean, I've been a Buddhist for years, for God's sake, but karma is a very, even though it's the beginning thing we learn, it's quite profound, you know, the teaching. And the real one is when we begin to gradually get this recognition that I am the person who creates me. I'm the one every second who is turning me into the person I want to become. That's an incredible sense of responsibility, and we don't normally have that because we're so addicted to being blamed, someone else creating us, someone else rewarding us. Even as Buddhists, we probably half think, oh, well, I'm sure I'll be a good girl. I'm sure Lama Zopa will take care of me. That's not the way we should be thinking at all. We should be getting a sense of, like, you know, if you want, you know, we've got a sense of responsibility. I'm the person who's doing it. And that's when we have that, then we really are in touch with the right thing, and we will have confidence. And what really struck me editing this book is that I've got to decide where I want to be reborn. I can't just, you know, often among Buddhists you say, oh, do you want to get reborn as a male or a female? Do you want to go to a Pure Land? What kind of rebirth do you want? We all say, oh, well, whatever's best, because we're too scared to decide. We've got to decide, Gus. I mean, if I'm going to go, you know, if I'm going to come to New York, I've got to have the thought, I will go to New York. That's intention. Then I have to create the cause to get to New York. It's not enough to say I'll get there. That's what you do with a future life. I've got to decide, okay, I want to be born in Amitabha's Pure Land, or I want to get born as a human. There's only two options. So I've got to decide which one. And then I have to see what causes that. Well, you know, wanting to go there, seeing the advantages, creating the causes, practicing virtue, practicing bodhicitta. That's it, Gus. Then get the, you know, go buy my air ticket, get my case, pack my bag, get to the airport on time, then I'll get to New York. It's not complicated. Next rebirth is exactly the same. Although it sounds hilarious to think like this. It seems too practical because we think next life is so mystical. No one knows. We're so used to that view. So when we start to realize I'm in charge of it. So when I started hearing about Amitabha's Pure Land, I had no interest in it before. And then Rinpoche in this chapter, it's very sweet. I started to understand what it was. It's a quick way to get enlightened, basically. I thought, well, I would love that. I'd love to be born with the Buddhas all around, with a subtle light body, no need for toilets and food and sex and drugs and rock and roll. I can practice 24 hours a day, get enlightened, then I can whiz back to the humans and help people. I thought, that's my plan. I've decided. So now, at the end of every night, when I go to sleep, I turn on my iPad and I hear my own voice reciting Tsongkhapa's prayer, the wish to go to Amitabha's Pure Land. And then I figure if I miss the boat to that one, then I'll get a human birth. And if I miss that one, then I'm in trouble. So suddenly it narrowed it down to realizing what are my options. And I mean, we live our lives like this. We're so intelligent. We love making plans. We love deciding exactly what we want and exactly what we have to do to get it. But as soon as it comes to rebirth, we become like babies, you know. Because we're used to the view that no one knows. We're used to the view of creators. We're used to the view of it being in someone else's hands and not mine. So that's a really powerful point. And then you naturally, when you know what you're doing, you can be confident. You can be. Lama Yeshe says karma takes care. And when we really do understand that the confidence in doing something is a main cause to do it. The confidence in purifying your mind, the confidence in doing anything is I can do it and I will do it and I am doing it. Then you will do it and it will happen. It's not mystical and it's not punishment and it's not reward and it's not cross your fingers. It's logic. You understand? Okay, good. So let's go back and continue. Next hour. So the 12 links. Okay, I'll do the two together in the first stages. So the eight stages, very roughly speaking, you know, the first thing to start to deconstruct, if you like, is the earth element. Oh, by the way, always remember, this is so important, this process of death is exactly the same as the process of going to sleep. That's not sarcastic, that's a fact. Physiologically and psychologically, going to sleep is exactly the same process as this death process occurs. The way it occurs, the same things occur. So the very first thing that occurs is your earth element ceases to function, and the result of that is your body becomes very heavy. Now we know that. When you're tired, you're going to hardly move your body, isn't it? It's so clear. Simultaneously, the I consciousness ceases. Now, we all know this experience. I'm sitting there chatting to Gus, and I'm sitting up, and we're having a conversation. You know, especially this one, your eyes, you're really tired, and you're struggling to keep your eyes open, and you can hardly see anything, isn't it? I mean, he doesn't know you're going to sleep yet. And, you know, We know this experience when you're driving a car, especially your eyes become, you suddenly they glaze over and you can't hold much information at all. This is the sign of this gradual deconstruction of these components, you know. At the same time, there's a particular set of, they call it sounds abstract, but try and hear the point. There's a particular way our mind functions, and they call it the 5 wisdoms. So one of these is the capacity, this one begins to cease at this first stage. It's the capacity of our mind to hold a lot of information all at once. So when you know you're wide awake and wound up, and just even now sitting here, maybe we're watching each other, but our eyes are cognizing a whole bunch of other things, and this capacity of the mind is holding all that information, a whole lot of information. But it's really clear as I'm becoming sleepy, that shrinks. I can hardly hold anything in my mind. That's really clear. So my body's getting heavy. My eyes aren't cognizing so nicely. That capacity to hold a lot of information is ceasing to function. And then very simply, the 4th thing to happen, and we're not aware of this. This is really just, this is the way they just label each of these 8 stages in terms of this particular subtle kind of thing that occurs in the mind that only the great yogis are aware of. But this occurs every time we go to sleep, and of course every time we die. So this first one is called the vision of a mirage. So if you think of a mirage, that's the interplay of earth and water, isn't it? So because the earth element is beginning to cease, it now gives rise to the water element. That becomes prevalent. So there's this subtle vision of a mirage, they say. So when we do this as a meditation, and that's how it's guided in the book, Rinpoche recommends it, then you pretend you're imagining it because you're getting used to this. And this is a really powerful practice. The great yogis who have got concentration, they go through these stages. There's a lovely chapter in the book, a very important one, called Death is What the Yogis Have Been Waiting For. Because very logical, very simple, very technical, not some romantic idea, they've practiced all their lives doing their meditations, in particular in the Vajrayana, where they've trained their conscience to go through these 8 stages, which is what occurs even when you're meditating. If you get to the more subtle level, your earth element ceases, then the water element ceases, the senses cease. That's what occurs in meditation if you're a successful meditator, where you've accessed the subtler level. So they go through this and they're training their minds for the time when death does come, because the process of death is much more radical. These 8 stages of deconstruction are much more powerful, much more potent, much more radical. And they're ready for it. They go through and they're conscious at each of these stages. And the greatest yogis can remain at the 8th stage, at the subtlest level of their mind, and they can meditate for hours, days, weeks, and even months, literally getting enlightened, literally, getting rid of all the misconceptions in the mind, removing all the obstacles to liberation, all the obstacles to omniscience. It's a very powerful, practical thing they're doing. Death is incredibly important. So, at this gradually goes into the 2nd stage, when now your ear consciousness begins to cease. Your ability to distinguish between pleasure, pain, and indifferent kind of merges. And we know this experience. I'm talking to Gus, and that last 10 seconds, I didn't hear what he said. We know this experience, because my ear consciousness is closing down. The senses are ceasing. The next element, earth, water. The liquids in the body begin to dry up. That's why when you wake up in the morning, because you've been through these 8 stages, you wake up in the morning, isn't it? Your body feels like lead. You'd rather just go back to sleep because the earth element hasn't quite come back yet. And absolutely for sure, we can experience the water element. Your eyes are dry, your mouth is dry, because the water element had ceased, or at least calmed down, not totally ceased, And when you're in a coma, exactly the same thing. You've gone through the same stages. So the 2nd one is the capacity to distinguish between pleasure, pain, and different ceases, the wisdom or whatever they call it. Then there's the ear consciousness, then the water element, and then the sign then is this subtle sign of and it's really the interplay of water, and the next one, fire. Well, they refer to it as smoky, smoky. And then this is the subtle vision. And the next one is the capacity of your, the so-called wisdom, is the ability to distinguish between friends, enemies, and strangers. You're losing the plot. You're deconstructing. You're losing the plot. You're still breathing, but you're gradually losing the plot. At this point, you don't distinguish between friends, enemies, and strangers. But this is the point now. Before that begins, generally speaking, it does seem that the whole process of these 12 links, the particular ones that play a role at death, they are occurring right about this point. This is the point, and in Lama Zopa's book, he quotes Pabonka Rinpoche. At about this point, these 12 links kick in, and this is what goes on. So the first to the 8th and the 9th of these 12 links are called craving and grasping. They're just two extra levels of very powerful attachment. Now, when we understand the whole universe that we live in, Buddha calls it a realm of attachment. It's created by our past attachment. We have these bodies, aren't they, with 5 holes that demand feeding. We are sensory beings in our nature, and the motor that drives us is attachment to fulfill the cravings, to fulfill the senses, isn't it? To fulfill our needs via the senses. So we're very totally sensory, and attachment is effectively the main cause of our suffering in daily life, and we need to learn that. So this craving and grasping, which occur every second of the day, they're the motors that propel us to do anything, you know. So at the death, they have a very particular role, and it's about now that they kick in. So the strong attachment, the strong craving, is a terror of losing this one. Now, we know one of the functions of attachment is that one, the horror of losing something. Another function of attachment is looking forward to something. That's the thing. You're always looking forward to something. Our lives, we spend our lives with our busy attachment minds planning everything. That's looking forward. Why? Because we're bored with what we've got. You have a meal. You're so excited. You're hungry. You look forward to the meal. That's attachment. You have the meal. Now you're stuffed full, and now you want to do something else. And you stand up and you go to the television, and you're bored with that. You stand up and you go to bed, and you're fed up with that. Our entire life, if we're not conscious, is driven by this constant craving, attachment for something more. And then or if you've got it, you don't want to lose it, or you're looking forward to something. Well, these are the ones that we can learn to work with, Lama Zopa says, at the time of death. So the craving, this intense attachment kicks in at that point, much more powerful than in normal life. So, of course, if you don't have any view, any thought, and have not practiced about when you're preparing, how you're preparing for your future life, then there really is nothing to look forward to. If you're a materialist, I'm sorry, what you've got to look forward to is a black hole. And this is no wonder how terrifying that is. Look at the horror. That's why if you're a Christian, you know where you're going. You're looking forward. You're thinking about God. You've been thinking about heaven. If you're a Buddhist, you're thinking about your rebirth. You're thinking about your Lama. You're thinking about the Buddha. You're looking forward to Amitabha's Pure Land. So Lama Zopa says it's still attachment, but it's very skillful to use it wisely. So he says craving is this first one, is a terror of losing. Then the grasping is a stronger, intense level of that attachment. And then depending on the way you die and the practice you've had in your life or not, is that grasping. You know, let's say you're very hot at the time, you're cold at the time of death. The grasping will crave for heat. So that grasping, the point about this grasping is that it's the one that when that kicks in, that's kind of like what opens up the number 2 link, which is all the millions of karmic seeds we've already planted. And that grasping is the trigger. The trigger that triggers the dharmic seed that will determine our future life. This occurs before you even stop breathing. So if that grasping is going to happen no matter who you are, but this is the point, as Rinpoche says, if you've prepared for your death, if you've helped your loved one, and you know all the different practices to do beforehand, and we'll see if we've got time to talk about those, and then your loved one is going through the death process, and you're there literally, metaphorically, holding their hand through this process of dying. They're hearing their Lama's name. They're hearing prayers from Jesus. Their mind is ready for it. The craving and grasping will kick in no matter what. But the grasping, which is the one that does the trigger, the number 2 link, which is the karmic seed that will determine your next life. So basically they say this, if this grasping is strong anyway, but if you've practiced, that grasping, as Rinpoche says, that we can hook that onto the next human birth. We can look forward to the next birth. We can look forward to the Pure Land. That's utilizing that grasping. So if we're doing that, that will trigger a virtuous karmic seed from our past non-killing, which will then determine that we'll get a human rebirth, or indeed an Amitabha's Pure Land rebirth. So it's very technical, but he says even though it's attachment, you can use it. I remember when somebody proofread this book for me, she said, oh, Rinpoche can't be saying that. But he is, exactly. And that's the Mahayana. It's not just when you get to the Vajrayana that you can use attachment. It's on the Mahayana you can use attachment. I mean, it's really reasonable. It's logical, you know. In this first level of practice, there's no wiggle room. You just give up attachment. But we go to the Mahayana, it's more skillful. You know, because you put bodhicitta motivation into what you do. You attach to the meal, but you put bodhicitta motivation for eating the meal, so that helps you mitigate the attachment. You've got a relationship, you know, a love relationship with somebody. Of course, it's attachment. It's all attachment. But if you have bodhicitta in it, you transform the action. That's what skillful means to understand this. We're helping utilize our attachment, you know, and at death especially. Because and so the point is, they say about this point, when you still got your wits about you, your body can still move. This is where you can see very clearly by the way a person behaves, whether a negative seed has been triggered, and then their death will be intensely fearful, intensely shocking, freaking out, screaming, because their mind is getting more subtle and they're seeing their future suffering rebirth. But equally, for a person who dies well, and for whom a virtuous karmic seed is triggered at this point, they will be radiant. Death will be a blissful experience because the karmic seed that determines your next life has been triggered, and then you can literally see it coming because your mind's getting more subtle. So this is the period that it's so important. And that's for the pussycat, for your dog, for your grandmother. And this is why, you know, when you understand this, not to rush off to the vet and get them to kill your poor little dog. You help your doggy go through this process. Make them safe and secure because they love you. They feel secure. And that's why helping anybody at the time of death, when there is so much fear, having one person who is kind to them, having one person who's loving to them, who helps them hold their emotions, who helps them feel secure, feel confident, feel safe and taken care of. This is the role at the time of death. And when they're peaceful, the virtuous seed can be triggered, and that is guaranteeing a decent human birth, or indeed a pure land. It's a very technical point, and it's not complicated. And so being there like a rock of Gibraltar for your grandmother or for your mother, because we know ourselves, listen to this point, we know in our life, when some terrible thing happens, the first thing we do is we think of someone to turn to because we are frantic. We can't bear the emotion. We can't hold the pain. So we desperately need someone to rely upon. Everybody's like that. I always think of when you're a child. My sister would be mean to me, let's say, and I'd have a complete mental breakdown. I'd be screaming and crying, and the first thing I do is I make a beeline for Mummy. Mummy, Mummy, I look up into her eyes. She can see I'm having a mental breakdown, like as if the earth has collapsed. But all it is my mean big sister, you know. And, you know, listen to this. This is powerful. What does my mother do? She can see my pain. She simply says, oh, darling, it's all right. And she gives me a hug. And guess what? I immediately believe her. That's how you help somebody. Just by being there, being loving and kind. I think of some of these old people's homes that I've been to. It's just beyond a nightmare, you know, the horribleness of them. There's no awareness of the mind. No one cares about these old, rotting old bodies, you know. I mean, they're drugged out of their brains, got television shoved down their ears all day and night because we don't understand the mind. And if I think of that, you know, even just the cleaning lady, kind, loving person who comes up to you in the bed and says hello, that's the most precious gift. Because there's so much fear and no one is prepared for their death. No one knows what's going on. No one has any answers. No one's helping them. This is why it's so important to help someone at the time of death, to be loving and kind, to make them feel secure, to make them feel supported. And then that means their mind will calm down. It's so obvious, you know, so important, so powerful. So at that period is when the karmic seed kicks in. I mean, I've heard wonderful stories about how people die peacefully, blissfully. I mean, literally, they say in the text, it's like going towards the light. But dying with a negative seed being triggered, and you can see it coming, is horrifying. I'm not trying to make us scared. It's just how it is, you know. I mean, this one friend of mine at Vajrapani in California, this is years ago, her husband died there. He's an Australian. I knew him. And he fell off the roof, and he's dying in her arms. She said he was radiant. Meaning the virtuous karmic seed had been triggered. You know, he's a practitioner. He died blissfully. You can see it very clear. The difference is stark. even with something, Rinpoche mentions an example of this in the book, because I mentioned it to him from an example that I had heard. A friend of mine in Australia, who's a nun who works with the dying, she explained to this particular situation of one man, as he's dying, this process is happening, and then suddenly she said she's never seen anything like it. It was so horrific. He became like a demon. His eyes turned up in the back of his head. He was like screaming in agony, seeing these monstrous visions, it seems like. So this other story, this man, he had freaked out, and then he calmed down, she said, and then he died peacefully. She spoke to her Lama, and he said, yes, it seems like he had this huge experience, like purified a lot of negative karma by having this horrific experience, but then his mind calmed down, and then a virtuous karmic seed was triggered, and then he had a good rebirth. And Lama Zopa said there was a similar experience. So this is why at the time of death, when this process is happening, it's so important to have everything conducive and perfect. And that's why, for example, dying in a hospital, I mean, I'm not criticizing hospitals as such unbelievable people. Look at these days now, people sacrificing their own lives, taking care of other people. But because of the chaos, it's not being horrible. The main thing at the time of death, because as the mind gets more subtle, you become unbelievably sensitive to the tiniest sound. So this is why the ideal is to be in a completely silent room. Only people who know what's going on should be there. Even before you die, one of the many things Rinpoche says is not to have all the troublemakers in the room, not to have all the emotional people, not to have the pets. I mean, we have so much attachment to our pets. And in our culture, we don't distinguish between attachment and love. But this can be so disturbing for the person dying. You've got to really you've really got to make the situation perfect with only the sounds of Dharma, to say to your grandmother, who's a Catholic or a Buddhist, only the sounds of Dharma. Everything in that room should only be conducive for the person who's dying to be peaceful. The sounds, the things they see, everything in that room should be beneficial for that person. Everything is to help them get imprints of the Dharma and to get a peaceful mind. That's the bottom line. And when you know that, you'll make some wise choices. But think of it, you're in a hospital, you're in a ward, other people's pain and suffering and crying and machines and doors banging and shouting. It can be beyond a nightmare for a dying person. It can completely freak the mind out. It needs to be incredibly silent, incredibly peaceful. Only the sound of mantras and prayers, Rinpoche says. So the fourth stage is now the third stage. The sign is of sparks, they say, the subtle sign. And that's the interplay of fire and air, isn't it? So the fourth stage, even the earth has gone, water, fire, and even your air, the breath goes out and doesn't come in. The element, tongue consciousness, I think. The five senses go, and by the fifth one, the fourth stage, the tongue consciousness ceases, the capacity for taste, and the capacity for tactile consciousness ceases. And so I remember Geshe Rabten always says, I remember one of Lama Zopa Yeshe's teachers, one of my teachers too, I knew him back in the 70s, Geshe Rabten, I always remember he said, that tongue, because apparently it turns very short and turns blue at the root. He said that tongue, which has spent its life gossiping, is now useless, So no longer the tactile ceases, the tongue ceases, and even the wisdom, as they call it, is this capacity to even know who you are yourself. You can't put anything together anymore mentally. You can't cope. You hear anything, you don't know what to think. You don't even know who you are, So then finally the breath stops. So that's when the brain stops. That's when the heart stops. That's when that's when we say the person is dead. But for this system, the person is not dead. And this is a major piece to consider, because then, what happens in hospitals, especially when they're desperate for beds, as soon as the person dies, out goes the body, they do all things to it, and whatever. Whereas if you have the ideal scenario, you'd have 3 days. That's the really important one. So, of course, if the mind of your loved one does leave sooner, and that's not impossible. I remember a friend of ours died in San Francisco in a hospital after an accident. And they were waiting for the Geshe to come and say prayers over her body. She'd stopped breathing. Then all of a sudden, her eyes opened wide, and the hospital said that she was on a machine being kept breathing, but her lungs exploded. So she straight away, when the Geshe came, he could see that her mind had left the body. So you don't need to have the 3 days in those cases, because it was such a shock to die like that. So then the next stages are these subtle ones, the white kundalini, which is this liquid energy that's the source of the capacity of the human body to experience pleasure. That goes down the central channel and comes to the heart chakra. The red one, different things. And at each stage, the different levels of mental consciousness cease, the subtler levels of our mental consciousness. So the sixth one is the red kundalini, the subtle red drop at the navel chakra, just below the navel, which is the source of the heat in the body. This is a medical thing as well. This goes up the central channel to the heart chakra. And then each of those stages is like a white vision, like a clear white sky, then a red vision, like a dawn. Then the seventh one is when these two cover the indestructible drop at the heart. And then there's like a deep black, like a dark vision. It's like a subtle faint. And then when they open up, that's the clear light vision, and that's the subtlest level. So even though that'll happen, many ordinary people stay in their mind, stay in their body for up to 3 days, even at that clear light stage. They're not conscious. The great yogis, though, are conscious, and they're meditating. So the point now is to make sure, the traditional one, of course, in the Tibetan Buddhist, there's different prayers you can do. So this book of Rinpoche's, 2/3 of the book, maybe 4/5, as all the practices, they're all in the back, they're all numbered. It's like a handbook. There are 87 distinct different practices, all kinds of mantras, all kinds of meditations, all kinds of sutras, all kinds of practices. And of course, you might just do one. As he says, if you just want to do one, choose Medicine Buddha. He's got lots of practices. It's his handbook. He's allowed to mention all these practices. We can be a bit overwhelmed by it. But when you understand what to do when, it's very clearly laid out, then you'll know what you're doing, and you can choose the practices that are appropriate in the months and weeks beforehand, the days beforehand, the hours beforehand, at the time the breath stops, at the time the mind leaves, and then the 3 days after the mind leaves. It's all in a chronological order, It's very clear. So then when the mind does leave the body, which can be 3 days later, the second that indestructible drop opens at the heart chakra, the very subtle consciousness, the clear light consciousness, leaves the body. And that second, you then become, known as the intermediate state person. You no longer are Robina. You finished. That person is now gone. So then you go through this reverse 8 stages, and you wake up in this kind of like intermediate state, they call it, between this life and the next. But that's your subtle consciousness, and it's like a dream state. So in the same way that when you go to sleep, you go to the deep set unconsciousness, and then you wake up during the night and you have dreams, don't you? It's like waking up to a halfway, Sometimes you can deeply be in deep sleep and not have any dreams, and many times you can't be conscious. But that's the subtle consciousness, and that's the same experience now, except that you've left the body and you have this intermediate state experience. And the quality, so we know in general dreams can be weird, you don't know what's going on. They can be very terrifying, they can be very blissful, depending. And so here, the experience of your intermediate state, which they say can last up to 7 human weeks, the experience of time is quite different, but if you measure it in human terms, it's like 7 weeks. It can be that long. Then the experience of it, depending on the karmic seed that was triggered before you stop breathing, that's the one that's already programmed you to go to that dog mummy's womb, the human mummy's womb, the lion mummy's womb, or whatever. So if it's going to be a suffering rebirth, the intermediate state won't be a pleasant experience at all. Because now you've become this new kind of person. Your human life is finished, this new set of karmic seeds. And at the time before you stop breathing, it's the karmic seed that determines your rebirth. It's the next lot of karmic seeds that determine the type of personality you have. The next lot of karmic seeds, which determines the people you meet and how they see you and treat you throughout your life. And the final lot of karmic seeds, all of these are triggered before you stop breathing. You're already programmed for the next life. There's 4 ways that karma ripens. The 4th one is called environmental karma. So the first one is the type of rebirth you get, in our case, human. The second lot of karmic seeds that were triggered before we stop breathing are the ones that they're called intentions, or kind of, your tendencies, basically, our personality traits, the kind of person we become. These do not come from our parents. This is crucial for the Buddha. They might affect who we are. They can teach us or encourage, but they don't give us music. They don't give us being good at football. They don't give us anger or jealousy. Our own tendencies were triggered at the time of our past death. So that track of karma is called intentions, similar to the cause, which is what our personality traits are. The next lot of karma is all our experiences at the hands of others in this life. We're very social beings, aren't we? We meet people from the time we're born, and they either are helpful to us or they're mean to us. Look at some people. They live their lives being treated beautifully, never get harmed, never get lied to, never get stolen from, never not given things, never treated ugly. Some people have a fortunate life. It's not good luck. It's not because they've got nice parents. They created the cause to create lots of virtuous karmic seeds such that everybody is kind and loving to them. Some people we can see, look at the earth, look at the humans, the suffering lives they had. That's the fruit of their past actions. Everybody experiences the fruit of their own past actions, but all the good ones as well. But our tragedy is we only think of karma in terms of the bad ones. It's very, very, very bizarre that we do that. You know, bad things do happen to us, but if we counted all the good things that have happened to us in our life, and I'm meaning moment by moment, things we utterly take for granted, getting food every day, having a bed to sleep in, having people to be kind to us, will be thousands and thousands and thousands of them, but we never think of them. We never ask, why do good things happen? Only when it's bad, which is why we're so tortured. And why we have this, just, you know, for what it's worth, we've got a bit of time, because the philosophy of attachment and anger are so outrageous. Attachment is this assumption that drives us every second. It's an assumption that I deserve only good things. It's the hubris. We assume we deserve good. So anytime anyone is kind to us, we sort of take it for granted. We never think twice about why we get a decent meal. That's because of your past generosity, people. Every second you experience a good thing, every one of those seconds is the fruit of a virtuous action that you did. We'd be blissed out if we realized this. We would really count our blessings as we hear. But no one's given it to us. We have created it. And then the few bad things that happen, and yes, some bad things really do happen to us, we also know that they are the fruit of our past actions. And so then aversion is anger, is this arrogance that assumes I don't deserve bad things. Attachment thinks I do deserve good. These are completely irrational, that we've made them up. They're voices of ego. When you have the view of karma, you fundamentally change that. You realize everything that happens, you created. Those weeds and those flowers in your garden, they are your weeds and your flowers. You don't go, who put weeds in my garden, and get outraged. Never. You know it's your garden. There's automatic sense of responsibility, and then you know what to do to change it. But the way we live our lives with the crazy delusions we have and the misconceptions, we think we're innocent victims who didn't ask to get born, and all the good things that happen are good luck, and all the bad things are bad luck. And we love the good and we hate the bad. I mean, we're demented. No wonder we suffer, Buddha says, you know. So the four lots of karmic seeds all trigger before we even stop breathing. And then then eventually in the intermediate state, mummy and daddy, in our case, hop into bed or wherever they hopped. And then the karmic conditions ripen and we run like a magnet and we leap into the fallopian tube. And they say in the text, if you're going to be born a boy, you're attracted to your mother. If you're going to be born a girl, you rush to the father. And then you wake up and you're a new person, growing in the womb, carrying out, fulfilling all the karmic seeds that you planted. You create yourself. It's a powerful concept, karma, you know. So any questions? Before we 25 minutes. Any questions?
Hi, Venerable Robina. Thank you so much.
Good, darling. Talk to me. Who is it?
Teresa.
Good, Teresa. Talk to me, sweetheart.
Two quick questions. The one, what was the fourth out of those ones with that determine the karmic seed?
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Yeah, the 4 ways that karma ripens, you mean?
The fourth one is karma ripens.
Yeah, no, the 4 ways, you mean you're asking me what are the 4 ways that our karma, the 4 lots of karmic seeds, the 4 bank vaults, yeah? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I missed the fourth one.
Yeah, no, I didn't finish. The first one is called the fully ripened result, and that's the type of rebirth we get, in our case, human. And that karmic seed was triggered at that time before we stopped breathing. And in our case, a very virtuous karmic seed from past non-killing, practiced in the context of keeping vows of not killing in the context of a spiritual practice. It's really powerful. Just being good is not enough, you know, Lama Zopa says. So that at the same time, the karmic seeds that would determine our personality traits, all our tendencies, they're all triggered. The third one is called experiences, similar to the cause, which is all the way we're seen and treated by others. And that's pretty clear. We're very social beings, aren't we? Since we're conceived up to now, we can divide our experiences into happy ones and suffering ones in relation to others. It's very powerful. And the fourth one, honey, is called environmental karma, which means the very physical world, the way it impacts upon us. So let's just think of one example of one action and the 4 karmic results. So for example, non-killing, the karmic result would be a human birth. We've got that one. Second, you wake up in this life with no thought to kill. Now, this is very fascinating because we can see most of our people, most of the humans on this planet, and even with respect, most religions teach that it's okay to kill some people. And most of us just think it's normal, especially the materialist world, because we think that ants and creatures don't have any feelings, so we just kill them all. We kill animals, we eat them, we slaughter things. I mean, it's incredible. Killing is a very strong habit among humans. So the Buddha's view is, that's the habit from having killed in the past. But if you wake up into this life with no thought to kill, or very soon afterwards, let's say when we become Buddhists, we decide we won't kill, that's because of the habit of not killing. It's stupendous. It's marvelous. It's one of our most important practices. The third way non-killing would ripen. Now, let's look at now. Lots of millions of people are sick now. People are dying young and are getting killed. I mean, some of the people are getting killed. I mean, the police are killing people. Your next door neighbor kills somebody. The car kills somebody. Or you get COVID-19 and you die young. That's the karmic result. Dying young or being killed by somebody, that's the experience similar to the cause, the third kind of karma from past killing. But past non-killing, look at us. We've got that one. We're not dead yet. Nobody is killing us. And we haven't yet died young. Some of us are even old. Because maybe we haven't had COVID-19, or we might have, but we got better. That's the fruit of non-killing karma. We've still got non-killing karma in our petrol tank. And the fourth way non-killing ripens is called environmental karma. And that's the very physical world, the way it impacts upon us. So the karmic result of killing environmentally is that the very physical world itself harms you. And that includes the sentient beings in it. I mean, look at it now. Human beings are the cause of death of other human beings, even touching each other. A stranger coughing on you can cause you to die. That's your environmental karma. It's not personal. It's usually when it's personal karma, it's experienced similar to the cause. But environmental includes the food, the weather, the water, other beings, They harm you. Some creatures will kill you. But that's the environment for you. It's very fascinating. So here we are experiencing the result of non-killing. We've got a human body. If we've got a tendency to not kill because we're living in vows, that's the result of non-killing. The experience similar to the cause, we're not dead yet, we haven't been killed, and we're still alive, that's the result of non-killing. And the environment, if we can eat reasonable food and breathe reasonable air and drink reasonable water and the things aren't killing us, that's the fruit of non-killing. So how incredible, how fortunate. Our conscious, intentional non-killing practice in the context of keeping vows of non-killing is why we are still alive, still healthy. Don't just take it for granted. Don't think it's a gift. Don't think you're lucky. It's not. It's the result of incredible hard work, your own virtue. Practice in the context of keeping vows of non-killing. And when you know that increases your wish to continue to practice because you know you want the same in the next life. It's pretty obvious, Okay, Sheila?
I have a question.
Yes, Rebecca. Who is it? How do I say your name? Anugraha.
Anugraha.
Anugraha, go darling, talk to me.
Here in Brazil, we have this clairvoyance people, spiritualist people. And I've seen it myself. People that lost, my friend lost a son, and then she went to see these people, and these people told things they could not know about this. I understand. How do we explain this?
I understand.
Now,
That's easy. That's called clairvoyance, this French word, we know. But in our culture, we kind of think it's a bit hit and miss. Some people know how to do it. We don't know how they learn. They don't know how they know it. They just kind of know. Well, the Buddha's view is, the Buddhist view is when we've got this single-pointed concentration, shamatha, this system of meditation, these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago created. Buddha didn't even do that. This enables us to access a more subtle level of mind. And inevitably, we will get what they call clairvoyance. So in this life, whatever you're good at is because you've done it before. Now, most people in this life who have some kind of clairvoyance, they're not very accurate. They don't know how they've got it. They don't remember their own past life, but you carry over the habit into this life. So whatever habit we've got in this life, killing or lying or football or clairvoyance, is because we've done some of it before. And the better we are at it, the more strongly we've practiced it, good and bad. So the Buddhist view is clairvoyance is a natural potential of every single person, and you get it just naturally when you accomplish single-pointed concentration, which is pretty intense to do that. You need several years in the mountains, pretty rigorous practice for several years. You will get concentration, and that means you will access a subtler level of your mind, which is capable of seeing the past and the future and the minds of others. So all these great lamas, it's a fundamental necessity. Buddha says you can't really begin to help people until you've got that capacity. But we're talking here in Buddhist terms as a much more powerful, when you've really got this clairvoyance, it's not just hit and miss. Everyone you see, you know their past. You can see their mind, you know their karma. And the really great lamas can see countless lives into the past and into the future. This is a fundamental necessity to really help others. And you mix it with bodhicitta and wisdom. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Good, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Who else, please? Questions?
I have a question.
Yes, my dear.
I was wondering, is there something called like a collective karma?
Yes, there is.
And how we can
Exactly.
relate
Yeah.
with what you were saying, that we as an individual are the only responsible for our
That's
own
right.
karma.
Exactly. So I think it's very evident. Look at us. We all relate to different groups. We are parts of different groups, aren't we? Women is a particular group. We have particular karma as women. All over the world, women talk about similar experiences for being women. That's a group karma. Men are a group. Black people are a group. Asian people are a group. Fish is a group. A group of people in one city who all have similar weather. If one city would experience an earthquake, that's from an action done all together from 1,000 lifetimes ago, maybe, as a group of people in another area, and then now this life, 1,000 lives later, the earth collapses underneath you. That's collective karma, all those people. Right now we're experiencing the collective karma with COVID-19. The whole world almost is experiencing, to one degree or another, collectively the result of collective past killing. Some of us have less experience or more of it, but we're experiencing it as a group, aren't we? It's affecting the whole world. So at some point in a past 1,000, 2,000 lifetimes ago, all the millions of people experiencing this now, as a group, have done certain actions together. We do things in groups, so we experience the results in groups, don't we? Good and bad. I mean, I'm always thinking, for example, the environmental result of virtue in general is the environmental result of non-killing is that the food is very delicious and the air is delicious. The environmental result of pure morality and pure virtue is everything is very clean. So you go to some places. I always think when I went to Zurich, Zurich is clean. People talk about Switzerland. They joke about Switzerland being clean. It really is clean. I can't believe it. The streets are clean. People's kitchens just seem to be naturally clean. Whereas you go to other places, no matter how hard you clean your house, it's always dirty and smelly. That's the karmic result of past environmental karma of past virtue. So it's almost beyond, you can't stop. The environmental karma is so strong, and that's from 10,000 lives ago, and that's collective. We do things as groups, so we experience the results of groups. An airplane crash is the karmic result of that 300, 400 people from who knows how many lives ago, the collective result of past killing together, so they get the result of being killed together. People win the lottery. They've never met each other before. That's the fruit of their past collective generosity. Do you understand? We do things in groups. Look at us. So we experience the results in groups. It's pretty clear. Do you understand? Clear? Good, darling. Thank you so much. Who else? Any questions?
I have a question, Venerable. This is Ekta. 3 years ago, I was in a Green Tara retreat with Jimmy, Neil, and we were doing meditation on the thumb. Is that, I want to understand that meditation of imagining almost the different kind of lights and energies. Is that death meditation? I'm trying to...
I understand, Nectar. So there's a really good chapter in Rinpoche's book, in the chapter that's called the Death is What the Yogis Have Been Waiting For. Rinpoche describes in very rough detail, because it's not this kind of book, about the necessity in that when we've got a Vajrayana practice, such as Tara, if you've done those meditations, you have, first of all, you have Tara out there, and then you bring Tara into you and you dissolve. There you would say that you do the practice of transforming the death process. As you deconstruct and get to the Tam, you're transforming death into the dharmakaya. So when you dissolve into emptiness, that's what happens when you get to the clear light mind. So practicing in your meditation, and you include the death process down to that point, that's transforming death into the dharmakaya, and you meditate on emptiness. Then when you manifest as the Tam, that's like going into the intermediate state. So you're transforming the intermediate state into the Sambhogakaya, the Tam. And then you manifest as the deity, that's then transforming rebirth into the deity. So this is the perfect way in Vajrayana, where you bring this death process and you combine it with your meditation on the deities. And that is the most perfect way to practice. And as Rinpoche says in that chapter, this is the most important component of our meditation when we do our deities. We often take many initiations, but when we do our main meditation, we must do that meditation, because that's preparing us perfectly for death. And if we really become great yogis, that we are able to get to the clear light one and actually become the dharmakaya. So it's perfect preparation, the best preparation.
Thank you.
Good, darling. What else, people?
Hi, this is Jay from Adelaide.
Yes, Jay. Happy to hear you, sweetheart.
Thank you. I actually work in palliative care.
Okay.
And I wanted to talk about an option you discussed, which is because the hospital has pressure to empty beds. This
Yes,
is a state
of course,
hospital,
darling.
like crazy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So what happens when somebody dies? You suggested possibly the morgue, which at our situation might be an option for us.
Okay, that's a very good point, Jay. So ideally, if you can negotiate beforehand, because sometimes maybe you're not busy and the people will be kind enough to let you have the bed. But so in the scenario in the chapter, the one where if your loved one dies in hospital, let's say, then you do your negotiating beforehand. And if you're fortunate, so that first of all, from the person's point of view, say it's my mummy who's dying, and you ring me up because you're the nurse on duty or you're the doctor on duty or whatever, you ring me up and you tell me mummy's dead, the first thing I'll say to you is, do not touch her, please. Can you just leave her there and I'm coming right away? And then can I have as long as possible? So even if you can give me a dozen hours, even give me 5 hours to leave me in peace with mummy, and I'll do the prayers and the different things. Do you understand? That's one scenario. Then the other one, if you have got a spare bed, you'd know already in advance, I've asked for that, and you will say, okay, this room is empty, then you can have it for 12 hours or something. And then the other one is this, and this is only just in this reprint. I said to Rinpoche, for example, Rinpoche, one of our own nuns died in Queensland, and then Rinpoche checked up in his way of checking on things, and he said it's best not to do the cremation for another 10 days. Well, of course, they've got to put her body somewhere, so they stick her in a fridge, right? But then I said, well, why can't we make that a conscious thing? So one of your options, and this is in the book, is if you can't be more than a half an hour in the hospital, and the hospitals won't let you take the body home, in general that's true, then you could ask them to be very careful not to touch the body, but to wheel it very gently and stick it in the fridge and leave it there for 3 days. That's a big possibility, and you can do all your prayers and practices at home. That's your option. They're the different options, Do you understand?
Yeah, no, I do.
Okay.
So you think that it's kind of an interest. It's sort of like, I guess I could think of it as, okay, I've gone for isolation in a cave with some others after I'm dead and I'm in the morgue.
What do you mean? I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused about that. That sounds a bit romantic.
Oh, no, I'm
saying,
thinking
Jen?
that's how I would see it, that I would prepare myself if
I
I'm
see.
in hospital.
No, but if you're the dead person, you've got no awareness. You're just dead. You wouldn't be like that for you. The main purpose of doing that is to leave your body in peace and give your mind a chance to leave when it's ready, not to force your mind to have to go by cutting up your body or doing something. Do you understand? That's the real point behind it.
Yes.
To give you some peace. Yeah, and what you said was nice. Now, this also, Jay, is interesting. This very strongly affects the next scenario in which your loved one dies. One of them would be, what if your loved one gives their organs? And this is another whole discussion. I mean, you're not asking me about it, Jay, but let's just talk about this one now. It's very important. It's very fascinating. Do you have any relationship with people in your job, with people who've given their organs? Do you have anything to do with that?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
This is very interesting. It'll be very interesting for you then. Okay, let me talk about this. Okay. So now, given that the karmic seeds that will determine your next life are triggered before you stop breathing, that's the period when you need to be very peaceful as much as possible. So the interesting point about this one of giving organs, first of all, and Lama Zopa, of course, in the book too, all the lamas praise this incredible action of compassion to want to give your organs to someone else. And the way Lama Zopa said it, in general, dying with that motivation, because it's so virtuous, it's like the perfect way to die. Your mind is so virtuous. It's such a powerful action to do that your death will be very, very, your mind will be peaceful because your mind is virtuous. So then that'll trigger a virtuous karmic seed. But there are problems from this. And I think all the lamas didn't, and I didn't know myself, the actual thing that happened when you give your organs. And so I explained this to Rinpoche, and he talks about it in the book. So of course what happens is, as soon as you stop breathing, as far as the modern world is concerned, you're now dead. So they want to keep you warm and toasty, because they want your organs to be fresh. So they, as we would say it, we keep you alive artificially. You're breathing and your heart beating and so on, you're warm and toasty and you look like a living person. Well, the Buddhist view is your mind is still there, but it's just subtle consciousness. So there's this very interesting, Jay, I read this book, I always quote this, while I was editing this book, I read a book by an American medical journalist called Nick Teresi, and it's called The Undead. And it ain't about zombies. It's really fascinating. He's a very funny fellow. He's a journalist. He's an atheist. About all the obstacles and contradictions and problems now because of this. And he was quite cynical about the industry. He said that the arrogance of it and misusing people and pushing people and the elitism of it. He was quite cynical, and he's a medical journalist. And all the problems that are now arising, and he was only talking about the States, but it's the same in Australia, that, we know very well, for example, he had a whole chapter on this, that the world always, in all cultures, people report people, quote unquote, coming back to life. Now, the materialist view of the world can't explain that, so we just leave it there. We put it in the too hard basket, I mean, and that's a really big issue now, he said, because there's always reports of this, and then they're ready to cut out someone's liver, and the damn person comes back to life. I mean, that's just very confusing. So one side of this that I find is excellent is that now the medical profession in our culture, they're forced to be questioning their assumptions about when death occurs. But it's very clear for the Buddhist one that you're not dead when you stop breathing. So one of the problems, and this is very stark in this particular book, and I told Rinpoche this, and I'll explain, this nurse who monitors the heartbeat during the time when they take the organs. This woman who offered her organs, they're keeping her breathing. She's on the operating table. Clearly her senses have ceased. She's not going to feel anything. But the nurse monitoring the heartbeat said that the heartbeat, as soon as they got the circular saw to cut the woman from head to toe, the heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. So, of course, the author joked, well, I wonder what a dead person has to be anxious about. But this is very clearly explained in the Buddhist view, and this is this. We know very well, I mean, he had a whole chapter also, and this is where now the materialist doctors are starting to question their assumptions, a whole chapter on people who report what they call out-of-body experiences during their operation. Well, technically, you're not out of your body, the Buddhist view. That's your subtle consciousness, but it has the experience of being beyond your body, because that's your subtle mind. And many people report that. Many people report that. Many people report even having dreams, and you're in the dream mind and you're conscious of what's going on outside. That's not uncommon. I remember even a guy who was kept alive by his mummy insisted in Italy not to kill her boy who was in a coma. So they kept him alive for 25 years. And he reported when he came back out of his coma that he was conscious the whole time. So this fits exactly with his explanation of the senses and the different components of the mind. You can be conscious at a subtle level. That's why one of the main reasons when your loved one is dying and when they're dead, for that 3 days you keep completely silent. Because even when you are dead and you've stopped breathing, your subtle mind can can be floating around, noticing what's going on, hearing the reports of your sisters and your brothers all talking about your will. I mean, it's going to be very, very distressing. And that's your subtle consciousness. Well, you can say that that's what happened to that woman. She had stopped breathing. Her senses had ceased. Now, not everybody who has an operation feels that. I had an operation recently, and I was, the anesthetic was lovely. I woke up all fresh, like after a nice sleep, you know. I wasn't aware of what's going on, how they cut me open, or what the doctors said. And this whole chapter, he reported that. So I remember one doctor, so basically her subtle mind was aware of what's going on. That means she knows she's still who she is. And she's observing them get the circular saw and cut her open. So of course she freaked out. Of course her heart went to 200 beats a minute because she's conscious of it. So as Rinpoche says, the doctors have to be very careful. The hospitals have to be careful. And I think no one buys into these views, of course, in the West, but there's more and more discussions about these things now. But I do remember one doctor was quoted in this book as saying, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but that much I can say. So I think that part of it's brilliant. They're really questioning assumptions now. Do you understand, Jay? It's very interesting.
Yes. Yeah. No, I do.
Okay.
And most of the people I deal with are too ill for this.
Okay.
But interestingly enough, almost everybody can donate corneas, which gives sights to 2 people. It's incredible.
That's amazing, isn't it? So the same with the corneas, they've got to cut them out soon, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, that's the part that Lama Zopa said. People just have to be careful because, of course, we don't think the mind is there, and we don't therefore think that they're still alive. And that's where it can be disturbing. That woman was a typical example. But as Rinpoche says too, and I can see this, many people won't be disturbed because you won't be aware of it. So it'll be okay for most people. But the other thing is even this. In the book, and I said to Rinpoche, is it possible after your organs have been cut out, is it possible that the mind is still in the body? He said, yes, in some cases it can be. So that's very interesting. It might not disturb many people. But the fact that it disturbs some, and what that means is the disturbing of the person is that then their karma can change and they can freak out and that can trigger a negative karma. And instead of going to a happy rebirth, they'll take a suffering rebirth. But that's part of it. That's the problem from this perspective. That it's disturbing the mind so that can mess up their future life, you know. So it's a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Jay. So kind.
I have a question in relation to what happens when the person that has died, which it might be your a family member, is not Buddhist.
Well, for example. No, of course, darling. Of course, that completely makes sense. You know, as Rinpoche talks about in the different chapters, what to do, what to talk about, what to see, what to touch, different chapters. So if if your loved one's a Catholic, you talk appropriate things to your mummy about God, how God loves her. Talk about heaven. Talk about looking forward to heaven. Talk about her good qualities. I mean, you just adjust it to the type of view that person has. If it's a materialist, you obviously don't talk about heaven. You talk about their good qualities. You make them feel comfortable. You make them, and one of the key ones is to talk about their good qualities. This is a very powerful point. We never think of our own good qualities, and when you're dying, you're really anxious and worried. But if you praise a person, if it's your grandma and you love her and you praise her and you thank her for a good life and you've done an amazing job with your life, you've left behind so many good things, she can be virtuous and therefore be happy, and that can help trigger a virtuous karmic seed because her mind is content. Do you understand?
Yes.
Makes sense. And the bottom line is to help your loved one or the mouse or the dog be peaceful, and that will encourage a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered. This is a technical point, but powerful when we understand it. To help the person be happy and virtuous and peaceful. And that can be even if they're in a coma. And that's where, too, if the person, let's say, is not a Buddhist, but there's nothing offensive about playing beautiful Buddhist mantras. The sound is so peaceful. It can help anybody, you know. It can be very powerful, even when they're in a coma. I mean, I heard so many stories. I've had my own experience of people, like this example that I'm giving before, we can still be conscious at a subtle level. So sound especially. You can, this one woman I went to visit, I always quote this story, a friend of mine in Sydney who had gone into a deep coma and they thought she'd die. And she wasn't really a Buddhist, but she knew various lamas, and I'd asked their students to ask them to pray for her. So I'd go into the hospital at night, late, just to stand by her bed and say mantras in her ears. And occasionally I'd say in her ear, Judy, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen's praying for you. So I'd say this every now and again, and she was in a coma for weeks, and then she came out, and she was all perky and happy and normal, and she told me that she had no memory of anything except this husky voice. She didn't know it was me. She thought it was a blue lady coming through the window, saying, Judy, Songtsa Kensei Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you. She heard those words. I remember Jeffrey Hopkins. So many stories like this. When he was in a deep coma as a result of Lyme's disease, they didn't think he'd ever get better. And the only thing, he said, that he could find in the depth of his mind in these comas was one particular mantra. It might have been the Manjushri mantra that Ling Rinpoche said to him, never forget this mantra. So he kind of clung on to that, and he came back to consciousness again. They were so surprised. There's so many stories like that, because the subtle consciousness, especially with sound, is very powerful. So that's the most powerful thing you can do for the little pussycat, for your pussy, for the little ant, for the mouse. Put it in a safe place. Don't just go and kill it, which is our instinct because we freak out. Just put it in a safe place where it can feel secure, it can calm down, and play mantras to it. I swear you could do nothing better for a sentient being. It's like a miracle for them. The ant, the mouse, the dog, the cat, as well as your grandma. So powerful. Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? I mean, did I answer your question? I went on ahead of something, but did I answer your question? Did I answer your question? Who asked me just that question now? Because I can't see you. Fernando. Did I answer it, Fernando? You heard the...
Yes.
Oh, good, darling. Very happy.
Yeah,
Thank you,
very
Fernando.
much.
Thank you, sweetheart. Anyone else want to talk to me? No? Is enough for now? Okay, we finish. So we have our little prayers up there, Sheila. Just dedicate. Thinking we've been here now 2 hours. It always goes so quickly. I'm always amazed. And all these thoughts we've had have sown seeds in the mind. So we've been very delighted. We've just done 2 hours of gardening. Be happy, So we nourish these seeds from this moment forward with all our efforts, our hard work, so we continue to develop our amazing potential so we can be of benefit to others. Be very optimistic, please. So, Gay, I'm going to sing my voice is so hoarse. We'll just say the English words together. Due to these merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And may the supreme jewel bodhicitta, this amazing aspiration to be a benefit to others based on compassion, that has not arisen in the minds of others, may it arise and grow. And may that which has arisen in the minds of others never diminish and increase more and more and more. That'll do. That's enough. Okay. Sheila, thank you. Gus, thank you. Everybody, thank you. I hope it's all food for thought. And we just keep moving, okay? Never give up, one step at a time. Never give up.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Much love, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, darling. Thank you, Gus. Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you so much.
Good, darling. I'm happy.
Thank you.
Bye, darlings. Bye, bye, bye. Bye, sweethearts.